left it somewhere, you can easily go and pick it up. Or if it's been stolen, you can hand the location over to the police so they can find the perp. Also, if your phone's been stolen and you're worried about someone accessing your information, these systems also offer a remote wipe feature. So if you've given up on recovery, you can erase all the data on your device so no one else will be able to extract it. This is a super important feature. It doesn't take long to set up, and if you're ever in a situation where you don't know where your phone is, you'll be really glad you did. When it comes to securing your accounts for the various websites, apps, and services you use, your password is your first and most important line of defense. In fact, your password is often the only thing protecting you from attackers. But if you're like most people, you probably don't treat passwords all that seriously. And to some degree, that's understandable because most people don't see themselves as targets. But once you realize that you are a target, you'll see why passwords matter so much. Most people use the same password for all of their accounts, which is a very bad idea. And as we'll see in the next lecture, there are a small handful of passwords that make up as much as 10% of all passwords, meaning some students of this course will see their actual passwords on the screen in the next lecture. Later in this section, we'll talk about what makes a good password and how you can create and manage extremely secure and unique passwords for all of your accounts without having to remember any of them. The net result is that your accounts will be virtually untouchable to the vast majority of attackers out there. Let's get into it, shall we? This lecture is fascinating to me, but it's also a little chilling. What you're about to see is a list of the 25 most commonly used passwords. Before we show it though, I want to talk about where this data comes from. Normally, outside research firms don't have access to people's passwords because they're encrypted, and reputable companies would never give away that information. But occasionally there's a data breach where a hacker breaks into a company's servers and manages to expose a large number of user passwords. Internet security firm Splash Data keeps tabs on these data breaches and looks through millions upon millions of leaked passwords, and the company uses that data to compile a list of the 25 most common passwords every year. These 25 passwords accounted for more than 10% of all the surveyed passwords, meaning that statistically speaking, dozens or perhaps hundreds of students of this course will see their actual passwords on the screen in this lecture. It is important to mention, though, that this data comes primarily from North American and Western European users. So if you live outside of those areas, the most common passwords for your country will be a bit different, though I imagine there is some overlap. So without further ado, let's take a look at the 25 most common passwords. First, we have 123456. Then we have password 12345, 1234567 football, QWERTY, which is the first 6 letters on the top row of the keyboard, 1234567 1234567. People really seem to like these simple numeric passwords. Then we have princess 1234, login, welcome, solo, ABC123, admin, I imagine that's a default password in a lot of corporate environments, 121212, flower, password with a 0 replacing the O, dragon, sunshine, master, hottie, love me, ZAQ1, ZAQ1, and if you're wondering about that one, those letters are positioned over on the left side of the keyboard right on top of each other. And then password 1. So I have to ask, do any of these look familiar? I know there are probably 2 camps here. Some of you are probably laughing, and some of you are probably panicking. If your password is on this list, it would be wise to change it as soon as possible because you are essentially a sitting duck. If yours isn't on this list, that's good, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're in the clear. A few years ago, Google conducted a survey of 2,000 people to learn about their methods for choosing account passwords. The results showed that most people tend to choose passwords based on easily accessible information. Things like pet names, anniversaries, birthdays, your child's name, your birthplace, your favorite sports team, or the name of your significant other. All of these categories are inherently dangerous because it's not that hard for someone to get a hold of that information and simply guess your password. In the next lecture, we'll talk about what exactly makes a good password so you can implement the best practices to keep your accounts secure. The main purpose of a password is user authentication. It's basically a way for you to prove that you are who you claim to be and that you have the right to access what you're trying to access. If a password is easy to guess, like the ones we saw in the last lecture, it kind of defeats the purpose, right? Because if your password is password, anyone can guess that, so it fails at its only job, which is authenticating your identity. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as using an uncommon word or phrase either. Even if your password is hard for a human being to guess, it may still be susceptible to what's known as a brute force attack. This is where an attacker uses a special computer program to systematically try a huge number of potential passwords until one finally works. The system calculates every possible combination that could make up a password and tests combination after combination over and over and over again until it finds the correct password. I should mention here that no password is completely safe from a brute force attack. Given enough time and enough computing resources, any password can eventually be cracked by brute force. The key is to use a password that's long enough and complex enough that it couldn't be cracked in any reasonable amount of time. As the length of your password increases, the amount of time it would take a brute force script to crack it increases exponentially. So you want your passwords to be long, ideally 12 characters or more, but you also want them to be complex. And when I say complex, I mean they should contain a mix of capital and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. That just adds another layer of complexity that makes your password more difficult to crack. It's also a good idea to avoid using a dictionary word or a simple combination of dictionary words. So you probably understand that cat would be a bad password, but passwords like black cat or cat in the hat wouldn't be much better because they're still pretty obvious combinations. In an ideal world, your passwords would look something like this. A long random string of letters, numbers, and symbols that mean absolutely nothing and as a result are almost impossible to guess. The problem is, as an imperfect human being without a photographic memory, remembering this password is going to be problematic, to say the least. However, as we'll see in the next lecture, you don't actually have to remember all your passwords if you use a password manager, which is something I highly recommend. But before we get to that, let's think about how we could come up with a password that not only meets our criteria of length and complexity, but is also memorable. One of the best tricks you can use to create such a password is by coming up with a mnemonic device of one or more sentences, and then compressing that into a password. For example, let's say our sentence is, my college major was computer science, and my roommate in room 214 was Jeff. If this is something you could remember, you could easily turn it into a password like this. Capital M, CMWCS, comma, AMRIR 214 W capital J period. That's 18 characters, including 2 capital letters, 3 numbers, and 2 symbols. And when you look at it, it doesn't mean anything, so it's not something anyone would guess, but it's still easy for you to remember because all you really have to do is memorize one sentence. That's easy enough, right? The next thing to keep in mind is that once you've come up with a password, you should really keep it to yourself. This may sound obvious, but multiple studies have found time and time again that more than half of all consumers share their login credentials with other people. Please don't do that. It's never worth the risk. Another common mistake is writing passwords down. For example, writing your password on a sticky note and keeping it on your computer monitor in case you forget it. Bad idea. Just memorize your password. If you really don't trust your memory and feel you need to keep a hard copy somewhere just in case, keep it in a secure location like a safe in your home or a safe deposit box at a bank. And finally, aside from making your passwords long and complex, you never want to use the same password for more than one account. For example, your Facebook password should be different from your email password, which should be different from your online banking password, and so on and so forth. The logic here is that if one of your accounts gets compromised, the others will be safe and sound as long as they have different passwords. But if you use the same password everywhere, attackers can get into all of your accounts with a single password, and that could be really, really bad. So make sure you never reuse a password. By the way, you've probably heard this advice before, but if you're like most people, you don't follow it because it just seems impractical. Even if you use the mnemonic device trick we talked about, it's not easy to remember a dozen or more unique passwords, and that's okay. I get it. We're all human. We have limitations. That's why I advocate using a password manager to generate and store secure passwords for all of your accounts so you don't have to remember any of them. That's the subject of our next lecture, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by just how easy it is to manage your security with a password manager. As we've seen, the best passwords are long, complex, and difficult to guess. Unfortunately, though, passwords that are difficult to guess are often equally difficult to remember. So what are we to do? The solution is actually quite simple. By far, the best way to create, store, and manage unique and highly secure passwords for all of your accounts is by using a password manager. A password manager is a service that generates secure passwords for you and then stores them in a secure, encrypted database. Then as you go about your day-to-day life, you can retrieve those passwords with the option of having them auto-filled in your browser. So you get all the benefits of secure passwords without actually having to remember any of them. Password managers generally provide browser extensions and standalone apps that you can use on all your devices. So you have all your passwords at your disposal wherever you are, and they're all protected by a single master password. So you remember one password, and your password manager remembers the rest. Now, it's worth mentioning that because you're using one password to protect all of your other passwords, it's crucial that you use a secure master password. So I recommend using the mnemonic device trick from the previous lecture to come up with something good and using that as your master password. So what are your options when it comes to password managers? There are many different services out there, but these are three of the most popular: LastPass, Dashlane, and 1Password. They all offer more or less the same thing. There are advantages to each one, and you can feel free to do some research and make your own decision, but the service I'm going to demonstrate and recommend in this course is LastPass. LastPass is kind of an industry leader. It's trusted and endorsed by security experts all over the world, and it's completely free to use on all your devices. I've been using it myself for years, and as someone who has accounts on probably hundreds of different websites and services, it has been absolutely life-changing. So we'll spend the rest of this lecture going through the process of setting up LastPass so you can start using it right away. If you decide you'd rather use a different password manager like Dashlane, that's fine too, and I think you'll find the functionality is quite similar. So to get started with LastPass, the first thing you'll want to do is head over to lastpass.com and click Get LastPass Free. What happens next depends on what device you're using. If you're on a desktop, you'll be prompted to install the LastPass browser extension, which we'll go ahead and do. If you're on a smartphone or tablet, it'll ask you to install the mobile app, but the process after that looks mostly the same. Once the extension is installed, you'll notice a new LastPass icon in your browser toolbar, and it should open up this registration page where you can start creating your account. So we'll enter an email address, accept the terms, and click Create Account. And then on this page, we need to create a master password. Again, this is the password that protects all of your other passwords, so it needs to be good. Remember the mnemonic device method we used in the previous lecture. We came up with the example, my college major was computer science and my roommate in room 214 was Jeff, which translates to capital M, C, M, W, C, S, comma, A, M, R, I, R, 214, W, capital J, period. Try to come up with something at least as complex as this. It's 18 characters, it contains 2 capital letters, 2 symbols, 3 numbers, and it's not easily guessable, even though it's something you can remember pretty easily. So we'll go ahead and re-enter the password in the next field here, And then we can create a password reminder. This is a short phrase that'll help you remember your password if you ever forget it, because there's no way to recover a LastPass password if you can't remember it. So if you think there's any chance you may forget, I recommend filling this in with something. Now, it's important to note that this reminder can be seen by anyone who's trying to log into your account, whether it's you or someone else who's trying to guess your password. So whatever you enter here should be enough to remind you what your password is, while still being vague enough that it won't give your password away to an attacker. For this example, I think the word college would be enough to jog my memory, so that's what I'll use. Once you're satisfied with your password and your reminder, you can go ahead and click Unlock My Vault. Your account will be created, and if you click the LastPass icon in your toolbar, you'll be able to log in and access your vault. So here it is. This is your LastPass vault. This is where everything is stored, and this is what the main interface looks like. The first screen you see here is Sites. It's empty right now, but once you start saving your credentials for different sites, you'll start to see those sites listed here. As you can see on the left side, we also have Secure Notes, which you can use to securely store just about anything: bank information, credit card numbers, Wi-Fi passwords, even things like insurance information and passports. It's really handy to have that stuff on hand when you need it, and it's all fully encrypted and can't be accessed without your master password. We also have Form Fills, which is basically a more secure version of what your web browser already does. It allows you to store credit cards, addresses, contact details, things like that, and then autofill that information into a form when you're doing things like shopping online. There's also a sharing center where you can securely share passwords with other people if you need to, say for business accounts you need to share with colleagues, or a Netflix account you share with your friends. This is just a better way of allowing people to access individual passwords without sending them over email or SMS or something like that. And finally, we have a security challenge, which analyzes the strength of all the passwords in your vault and gives you a percentage-based score that represents how good your security is as far as passwords go. I definitely recommend exploring all this stuff, but for the purposes of this lecture, we're mostly concerned about passwords. So how do you actually use LastPass on a day-to-day basis for logging into accounts? First, we need to add our first site, and to do that, we'll go back to the Sites tab. If you want to add a site manually, that is, if you just want to type in all the information yourself, you can click this button here at the bottom. This is all the information that LastPass can store about a site for you. All that's required is a password, but filling out everything else here will make your life a lot easier. So first up is the URL. That's just the web address of the site you want to add. LastPass uses that to determine when you're on a particular site, so it knows when to autofill the username and password. For this example, we'll use facebook.com as the URL. The name field is completely optional. It just lets you give the site a custom name if you prefer something other than the URL. So we'll enter Facebook here. Next up is folder. Once you start accumulating a ton of sites, it can be helpful to start grouping them into folders. For example, you might have a folder for work, one for social media, one for entertainment, and so on. This is totally optional too, but we'll go ahead and enter social media. Next, you have your username and password, which is pretty straightforward. Your username is whatever ID you use to log in. So like with Facebook, you log in with your email address, so you would enter your email address as the username field, and then of course enter your password as well. Notes are optional, and that's probably not something you'll use much, so we'll just skip over that for now. And before we save this, let's also expand the advanced settings down here and take a look at those. The first option down here is Require Password Reprompt. You might use this for especially sensitive sites or information. It just requires you to enter your master password again before you can access the password for this particular site, just to make sure it's you. The second option is auto login, which is really handy. If you check that box, when you visit this site, LastPass will not only autofill your information, but it'll also submit the login form. So you'll be logged in automatically without having to type anything or click anything. It's just an instant login every time you visit this site. And then the third option here is disable autofill. That's exactly what it sounds like. If you check that, LastPass will still store your password for the site, but it won't fill in the login form automatically. So now if you click save, that site will be added to your vault, as you can see here. And if we go ahead and visit the site, I'll show you how to get your password out of LastPass and into a website. It's very easy. You see the little LastPass icons in the login form? If you click one of those, you'll see any matching sites that you have saved in your LastPass vault. This is the one we just created, and if we click it, it fills both your username and your password into the form, and you're ready to go. Okay, so we saw the process of adding a site manually, but LastPass can also add a site automatically after you either log in or sign up for an account somewhere. So first let's log into an account just as we normally would. And you'll notice LastPass offers to add that site for us. Super easy, as long as you confirm that your password will be saved in LastPass and you don't have to do anything else. Now, of course, LastPass only increases your security if you're actually using unique, secure passwords for all your accounts. If you're still using the same password for every site, it doesn't do you much good to store that password in LastPass 15 times. That's why I recommend generating your passwords through LastPass as well. When you're signing up for a new account, you'll see a little icon in the password field. If you click that, you can have LastPass generate a secure password and fill it in for you. Then once you complete the sign up process, it'll ask you if you want to add that site to LastPass, and just like that, you've created an extremely secure password that you never have to remember. You can also follow the exact same process to change one of your existing passwords to something more secure, and if you ever need to, you can generate a password from the LastPass menu in your toolbar and just copy and paste it somewhere. Using LastPass on a smartphone or tablet is a little more cumbersome, but it's still fairly intuitive, and it allows you to have all of your passwords and secure notes at your disposal at all times, so I highly recommend installing the LastPass app on your mobile devices. So from here on out, you can replace all your existing passwords with secure passwords that are much more difficult to crack, and you can let LastPass remember all of them for you. Your LastPass master password truly is the last password you'll ever have to remember. In the last section, we dove deep into the world of passwords. We saw some pretty bad passwords, but we also talked about what makes a good password and how you can use a password manager to generate and store secure passwords for all of your accounts. If you follow the advice in that section, you will be light years ahead of most typical web users when it comes to security. And that's fantastic, but we can still go a little bit further. Remember, early in the course, we talked about the importance of multi-layer security. Well, your passwords are one layer, and at this point, they should be quite a strong layer. But again, no password is ever 100% secure. And even if you're careful, there's always a possibility that you could fall victim to a phishing scam where your password is stolen by a third party. But don't worry, in this section, we're going to talk about another layer of security that will lock attackers out of your accounts even if they manage to steal your passwords. This layer is called multi-factor authentication. It's a method of access control where a service grants you access only after you present multiple pieces of evidence that you are who you claim to be. This evidence comes in three forms. There's knowledge, which is something you know, possession, which is something you have, and inherence, which is something you are. In most cases, the knowledge factor is your password. It's something you know that hopefully no one else knows. An example of a possession factor would be your phone. So you enter your password, and then your phone gives you a unique code that you have to enter to verify the login process. It just proves not only that you know your password, but that you're also in possession of that particular mobile device. And finally, inherence factors include biometric methods such as fingerprint readers, retinal scanners, and facial recognition systems. Multi-factor authentication includes any combination of two or more of these categories. But what I'd like to focus on in this section is a common two-factor authentication process where you combine your password with login verification on your mobile device. Most popular web services these days offer two-factor authentication, and more services are adding support for it every day. Here's what it looks like in practice. You go to a website to log in, you enter your password, and the website says, please enter the code that we sent to your phone. So you pick up your phone and you've got either a text message or a push notification containing a 4 to 6 digit code that you can then use to log in. That code is basically a second password that's generated on the fly and can only be used once. So even if an attacker gets a hold of your main password, they won't be able to access your account unless they also have access to your phone. I promise this is not as complicated as it may sound, and I highly recommend setting up two-factor authentication on any account that supports it. It does make logging in slightly less convenient, but I think the added protection is well worth the extra 5 to 10 seconds you'll spend entering a login code. In the next few lectures, we'll take a closer look at two-factor authentication, and you'll see exactly how to set it up on some of your favorite accounts. There are a couple of different methods that services use to generate login codes for two-factor authentication. You'll have different options with different sites, so in this lecture we'll take a moment to get familiar with each of them. The first and most basic method is SMS, where a login code is sent to your phone number in a text message. SMS verification is pretty easy to set up, and it's generally your only option if you don't have a smartphone. But it's actually not the most secure option. There have been cases where attackers have used social engineering tactics to get phone carriers to redirect a person's text messages so they can break into their accounts and sidestep the whole two-step verification problem. With that said, SMS verification is offered as an option by many popular web services, and it does add a strong layer of security to your accounts. The other method that's getting more and more popular is an authenticator app. This is an app that you install on your smartphone and link to any accounts that support it, and all it does is generate login codes. The same type of code you'd receive in a text message, but it's always generating them. Every 30 seconds, the old one expires and a new one appears. So when you need to log into one of your accounts, all you have to do is open that app and a code will be waiting for you there. Services that support authenticator apps generally support any third-party authenticator app, but one of the most popular choices, and the one I recommend, is Google Authenticator. Adding an account to your authenticator app is as simple as scanning a barcode. You just scan it with your camera and boom, you've got secure login codes whenever you need them. Some companies go a little bit further and use their own proprietary systems for login verification. Apple is a good example. When you have two-factor authentication set up and you go to log in using your Apple ID on a new device, you'll get a push notification on your existing iPhone, iPad, or Mac asking you to confirm the login. So those are the different options you have when it comes to two-factor authentication. If anything's unclear, don't worry, we'll take a closer look in the coming lectures. If you've set up a password manager such as LastPass and you're generating secure passwords and storing them all in your vault, you're much more secure in one sense because all of your passwords are unique and complex, which is super important. But there's also an inherent risk in using a single password to protect all of your other passwords, right? Because if an attacker gets their hands on your master password, they've got access to every single one of your passwords. Well, that's where two-factor authentication comes in, and your password manager should be the first place you enable it. That way, even if your master password is compromised somehow, all of the other passwords in your vault will be safe. Let's take a quick look at how you can enable two-factor authentication in LastPass. In a desktop browser, open up your vault and click Account Settings toward the bottom of the sidebar. At the top of this box, click over to the tab that says Multi-Factor Options. As you can see, there are quite a few different methods here that you can use. For this example, I just want to take a look at the first two, LastPass Authenticator and Google Authenticator. In my experience, LastPass Authenticator is the most convenient option available. Whenever you log into your LastPass account, it sends a push notification to your phone, and all you have to do is tap a button to verify the login. It's as simple as that. You don't even have to enter any codes. To set it up, click this edit icon over here and change the enabled option to yes. You'll need to re-enter your master password, and once you've done that, you'll have to enroll your device with LastPass Authenticator. Click enroll, and then follow the instructions on screen to install the app and connect your device. Now let's set up Google Authenticator. As I mentioned earlier, Google Authenticator is universal and can be used for a wide variety of different accounts, including LastPass, so I figured now would be a good time to see it in action. You can start by installing the app on your mobile device. Just search the App Store for Google Authenticator, and once you've done that, you can click the edit icon next to Google Authenticator in LastPass, and then next to where it says barcode, click View. You'll have to verify your password and then it'll show you a barcode. In your Authenticator app, tap the plus icon in the upper right corner to add a new site. Then choose Scan Barcode. Then all you have to do is use your camera to scan the code, and it'll start generating login codes that you can use to verify your identity. And you can follow the same process for other services that support Google Authenticator. It really is as simple as scanning that barcode. Also, once your app is set up, don't forget to enable Google Authenticator using this first drop-down box right here. So that's what two-factor authentication looks like in LastPass. If you enabled both of those methods, next time you log into LastPass, you'll have the option of just tapping Verify in LastPass Authenticator or opening Google Authenticator and typing in the code that it gives you. Either way will work. If you're like most people, your Google account is a big part of your life. It may have access to your credit card for shopping on Google Play, important documents in Google Drive, your email in Gmail, your videos on YouTube. A significant portion of your digital life is wrapped up in your Google account. And that's why it's so important to keep it secure. So you probably want to enable Google's two-step verification system. To do this, head over to your Google account security settings. Like LastPass, Google offers a few different options here, and it's a good idea to enable more than one just in case one fails or you don't have access to it. The first and simplest method is the Google prompt. To set this up, you just need to have the Google Search app on your phone, and whenever you log in, it'll send you a push notification asking if you're trying to sign in. You just tap one button to verify it's you, and you're in. The second option is the Google Authenticator app. This works exactly the same as it does with LastPass. Just enable it, scan the barcode, and you'll have login codes whenever you need them. Google can also send you codes by voice or text message. This is pretty straightforward as well. Just add your phone number, and then you can use a voice call or SMS instead of an app. And finally, Google also offers backup codes that you can use in the event that you don't have access to any of the other methods of verification. So you can write these down or print them, but if you choose to do that, make sure you keep them in a secure location, and keep in mind you can only use each code once. Facebook is another account you don't want to lose control over, and thankfully it also offers several options for two-factor authentication. You can set this up by opening your settings and clicking over to the Security and Login tab. Locate the option to use two-factor authentication and click Edit. Here you'll see the various options you have to add another layer of security to your account. The two you'll most likely want to set up are text message and code generator. The text message option is the standard method where you receive a code by SMS, and the code generator is a feature where you can generate codes and verify logins right from within the Facebook mobile app. If you'd rather keep all your login codes in one place, you can also use Google Authenticator. Just click where it says Set up a third-party app, scan the barcode with Google Authenticator, and enter the code it gives you to confirm. Pretty simple. Twitter also offers multiple forms of two-factor authentication. To set it up, open your account settings and check the box that says Verify Login Requests. By default, this will enable SMS authentication, but you can also use Google Authenticator by clicking Set up a Code Generator app. As you've probably come to expect, you'll see a barcode that you can scan with your Authenticator app, and then you just have to enter the code it generates for you, and you're good to go. Once you've done that, you can also click this button to get a backup code that you can keep somewhere safe, just in case you ever lose access to your device. So as you can see, the process of setting up two-factor authentication follows roughly the same protocol everywhere. It doesn't vary all that much. So with that in mind, you should feel comfortable digging into the settings of other services and setting up login verification on any of your accounts that support it. If you're short on time, I would recommend prioritizing your most important accounts, the ones where an attacker could do serious damage. For example, your email, your bank, payment services like PayPal, any account that has access to your credit card or bank information. Take a few minutes to set up two-factor authentication for all of these. I know it takes time, and I know it makes the login process a little less fluid, but if it prevents an attacker from getting into your accounts and stealing your money or your identity, it'll all be worth it. And just to reiterate a point I made earlier, if you have the option to use either SMS or an Authenticator app as your second factor, I recommend using the Authenticator app. Google Authenticator makes the process super simple, and it's a little more secure than SMS, so that's something to keep in mind. Either way, you're adding another layer of security on top of your already strong passwords, and you're making yourself a much more difficult target for cybercriminals. At this point in the course, we've covered most of the factors that people traditionally think of when it comes to security. But there are still some risks that often get overlooked, and I want to devote this section to one of them. Many of today's popular web services allow third-party developers to create interconnected apps using data from their platforms. For example, if you've ever logged into a website or app using your Facebook account or granted permission for an app to access your Google account, you know what I'm talking about. It looks something like this. Well, as you might imagine, authorizing certain applications to access your accounts introduces some security risks. For instance, if you've logged into an app with Google and given it full access to your Gmail account, it has the ability to read all of your emails. And not only that, it can also send emails on your behalf. Now, of course, if the app you're using is a third-party email client, it needs those permissions to function properly. There's no way around that. But if an app is requesting access to something you don't think it needs, the best answer is usually to deny those permissions. What makes these connected apps unique is that you authorize them once, and then they have lifetime access to your account, forever, without ever needing to access your password or your two-factor authentication method. They don't need anything, and they have access indefinitely. From the perspective of a cybercriminal, connected apps are a goldmine. They make it so much easier to infiltrate your accounts and steal your data because they no longer have to target you as an individual. They can just target your connected apps and get your information that way. So here's the thing. Your accounts are only as secure as the least secure app you've connected to them. And when I say the least secure app, I'm not just talking about sketchy apps that clearly have bad intentions. Those are obviously bad, and you should try to avoid them. But even apps that are totally legit can pose a risk if their security isn't locked down. Because if they get hacked, if an attacker accesses their server, that attacker will also have access to your data and your accounts. The solution is to be extremely choosy with the permissions you grant to third-party apps. You can usually grant permissions selectively, so you don't have to provide access to your entire account. You can just give an app access to this, this, and this. In this section, we'll talk about how you can do that with a couple of popular web services, and we'll talk about how you can revoke any risky permissions you may have granted in the past. Let's first take a look at connected apps as they exist in Google's ecosystem. When an app wants to access your account, you'll see a prompt that looks something like this, detailing the exact permissions the app wants to access. It can be as little as your email address and basic profile info, which generally shouldn't be a problem, or as much as your entire Google account, including your email, your files, everything. Whenever you're signing into an app with your Google account and you see this screen, make it a habit to look over the permissions and determine whether they're necessary for what you're trying to do. If they are, you can go ahead and click allow, but if anything makes you go, hold on a second, this seems excessive, you should probably think twice. The nice thing about these permissions is that you can revoke them at any time. If you open your Google account settings and click Connected Apps and Sites under the Sign In and Security section, you'll see a list of apps that have access to your account, and you can click Manage Apps to see more details. So if you're like most people, you probably have quite a few apps listed here that you had no idea had access to your Google account. That's okay though, we're going to clean everything up. What I recommend you do first is just scroll through this list and see if there are any apps that you don't use at all or haven't used in a long time or don't recognize. Those should be the first to go. To deauthorize an app, simply click on it and then click Remove Access. Next, you'll want to look at the specific permissions that each app has access to. And again, if anything seems excessive, you can deauthorize it. When the permissions say things like basic account info, that's probably an app where you just use Google as a sign-in method rather than creating a username and password, and those are safe because they don't have access to your private data. But anything that has full access to your Google account or your Gmail and Drive accounts is worth a second look. Another thing worth mentioning is that Google divides your apps into two sections, one for third-party apps and one for official, trusted Google apps. If you see anything in the third-party section claiming to be an official Google app, like Google Drive or Google Chrome, for example, it's probably a scam and you should deauthorize it. Official Google apps will only show up in this bottom section. So that's how you can manage your connected apps in your Google account. If you have a lot of apps, it's definitely worth cleaning up a little, and you can always return to this page in the future to keep an eye on things and make changes as necessary. Facebook also has a huge ecosystem of connected apps. When you go to authorize one, it'll look something like this. You've probably seen this on many occasions. The nice thing about Facebook's login process is that you can actually edit the info you provide. So if you think an app is requesting excessive permissions, you can trim them down a little bit so they only get access to what you feel is necessary. And like Google, Facebook offers an interface where you can manage the connected apps you've authorized in the past. To get there, open your settings and go to the Apps section. Again, you probably have more authorized apps than you realized, and it's worth giving this list a once-over just to make sure everything is in order. To see what information an app has access to, just click on it, and as with the login screen, you can edit this stuff at any time. So if you gave an app too many permissions, you can always revoke them, and if you want to deauthorize an app completely, just click this little X to remove it. I recommend removing any apps that you don't use anymore or that you don't remember authorizing in the first place. And in the future, if you use Facebook to log into other apps and services, make yourself aware of the permissions they're requesting and deselect any information you're not comfortable handing over. Another type of connected app, so to speak, that may have access to a significant amount of your private data is a browser extension. Browser extensions, also known as add-ons, are small apps that add extra features and functionality to web browsers like Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. One extension you probably have installed if you've been following along with this course is LastPass. Extensions can be great. I use quite a few of them myself, but it's important to be aware of the data they have access to because a rogue extension could totally compromise your security. So how can you be sure that your extensions aren't out to get you? Well, first of all, as with mobile apps, you should only install extensions through your browser's official extension marketplace. In the case of Google Chrome, the browser I'm using, that's the Chrome Web Store. Before you install an extension, be sure to check out the user reviews. An extension with thousands of 5-star reviews is generally a safer bet than one with just a handful of reviews. Then, as you're adding an extension, you should see an overview of the permissions it needs to function. Oftentimes, this includes the ability to, and I quote, read and change all your data on the websites you visit. So you can see it's very important that you only install trusted extensions. You're giving a lot of power, a lot of trust over to this one little app, so you have to have a fair degree of confidence that it's not going to betray you. To manage your existing extensions, again, I'm using Chrome, but the process is pretty similar from browser to browser. Open your settings menu and find the extensions or add-ons option. Here you'll see a list of the extensions you have installed, and you can click details to get more information about each one, including the permissions you've authorized. Browser extensions are a common source of malware and other security threats, so if you see anything in this list that you don't recognize, you should probably remove it right away. And of course, if any of your extensions have permissions you feel are unnecessary, that may be cause to remove them as well. As we wrap up this section, I want to clarify my advice so there's no confusion. What I'm advocating here is not that you don't authorize third-party apps and extensions. I use plenty of them myself, and they can definitely add value to your life. I'm simply suggesting that you make yourself aware of the apps you've authorized and what permissions they have. When you authorize these apps, you're essentially giving them an open doorway into your digital life, so it's important to do so only with apps you trust. By the way, this section is by no means an exhaustive list. These are just a few examples of scenarios where you've probably authorized third-party apps before. The idea here is just to get you into the right mindset so you can apply the same principles to other accounts and services where you may be allowing third parties to access your data. Be very skeptical with any new third-party app and only grant access to data that you're comfortable giving away. When it comes to protecting your private data, one of the most powerful tools you can have at your disposal is encryption. So I'd like to spend some time in this section discussing what encryption is and how you can use it to keep your information from falling into the wrong hands. So what is encryption? Very simply, it's a technology that turns your plain text data into an unreadable, jumbled code. Encryption comes from the art of cryptography, which people have been using for thousands of years to send secret messages and protect sensitive information. In the old days, that is, before computers and the internet, people would use what's called a cipher, which is a system of scrambling text in such a way that it's unreadable, but can later be unscrambled if you know the key, which is the operation that was used to scramble it. More than 2,000 years ago, Julius Caesar is said to have used alphabet shift ciphers, where each letter in a message is shifted a certain number of letters down the alphabet, and then shifted back by the person who receives the message. As an example, we can take the word hello and shift each letter 3 letters down the alphabet. So the H becomes K, the E becomes H, the 2 L's become O's, and the O becomes R. So instead of the word hello, we have KHOOR, which can then be shifted back if you know the key to the cipher, which is simply an alphabetical shift of 3. This kind of cryptography never really went out of style. In fact, many military leaders continued to use similar tactics to send encoded messages in the 20th century. Today, in the digital age, we still use cryptography, but things have gotten a lot more complex. Instead of a simple shift of the alphabet, we now use advanced computer algorithms to encrypt and decrypt data. You still have an encryption key, but it's much more complex and not something you could decode on your own without the help of a computer. For example, I took this plain text sentence and passed it through an encryption algorithm, and the result looks like this. As you can see, the encrypted version is completely unrecognizable. You would have no idea what the original text was, and that is the point of encryption. We use it to securely mask data that we'd prefer to keep private. That way, even if our data is intercepted, it'll be useless to an attacker unless they know the encryption key. How modern encryption algorithms actually work is a little outside the scope of this course, but the point I want to get across here is that encrypted data is much safer from attackers than unencrypted data. In the next few lectures, we'll talk about some real-world applications and how you can use encryption to protect your private information without being a cryptography expert yourself. The first form of encryption I want to talk about is something I actually mentioned very briefly earlier in the course, and that is SSL. SSL is an encryption protocol that provides privacy and data integrity between two communicating systems, generally between your web browser and the server of a website. Whenever you see HTTPS in your address bar, which is often accompanied by a padlock icon, that means the website is using SSL to protect your data. When you're on a website that supports SSL, no data that you submit to that website can be intercepted by a third party sitting between you and the server, because it's all encrypted. That includes your passwords, credit card numbers, and any other private data you may be transmitting. If it's happening over HTTPS, it's encrypted, and nothing is ever sent in plain text. In practice, this means you should always be aware of whether a site is using SSL or not, which again is as easy as glancing up at the address bar. If a site is using SSL, you can feel a little more comfortable about doing things like entering passwords or making purchases. You still have to determine whether you trust the website itself, but you can feel confident that a random hacker isn't going to grab your credit card number while it's in transit. The flip side of this is that you should be especially skeptical of sites that ask you to enter personal information but don't use SSL. Don't get me wrong, a non-HTTPS site isn't inherently bad. In fact, a lot of websites still haven't made the switch. But if you're being asked to enter your credit card information on a non-HTTPS site, you should walk away, period. You never want to send private data like that over an unsecured connection. So the moral of the story here is pretty simple. Before you enter sensitive information like your credit card number, look up at your address bar to see if your connection to the site is secure. If it's not, there's a chance your data could be intercepted by a third party, so you may want to think twice. In this lecture, I want to recommend a way to encrypt all of your internet traffic, including the websites you visit, the apps you use, and all of the data sent and received by your devices, guaranteeing that your personal data stays private and safe from eavesdropping. What I'm referring to is a virtual private network, or VPN for short. A VPN encrypts everything you do online and routes your data through a faraway server that then communicates with the rest of the internet on your behalf. The result is a fully encrypted internet connection that prevents anyone, including hackers, your employer, your internet service provider, and even your government, from being able to monitor your activity. So why would you want to do this? Well, there are a few different benefits, and they apply to different people in different scenarios. For me, and for the purposes of this course, the most important selling point is security, particularly if you use public Wi-Fi hotspots. So let's say you're in a coffee shop and you connect to the Wi-Fi network there and go about your business. Your internet traffic, as well as any unencrypted data that's being sent or received by your device, could potentially be intercepted by any other random person on that network. Public Wi-Fi can be extremely dangerous, and hackers have even been known to set up fake Wi-Fi hotspots to get people to connect so they can steal their data. Not good. But if you're in the exact same situation and you're using a VPN, those hackers won't be able to steal anything because all they'll see is a jumbled mess of encrypted data. So if you often find yourself connecting to public Wi-Fi access points in restaurants, coffee shops, or airports, for example, a VPN is a must. Another common use of a VPN is by people who do a lot of heavy downloading, especially using peer-to-peer methods like BitTorrent. Whether they're downloading legally or illegally, they don't want to be subject to the witch hunt that often happens in that situation, so they use a VPN and all their data is private and protected. A VPN can also be used to bypass firewalls and geographical restrictions. For example, if some content or service isn't available in your region or country, you can use a VPN to appear as if you're in a region or country where it is available. And just like that, you've got access. Same thing if you're behind a company firewall that blocks certain websites or content, a VPN will allow you to access that stuff. And finally, a VPN gives you a general sense of privacy that you wouldn't have otherwise. Normally, everything you do online can be tracked by the network you're using, your internet service provider, your employer, and even your government in some cases. If you would rather keep a low profile and avoid snooping, a VPN is the answer. So with those benefits in mind, how do you actually connect to a VPN? Well, you'll need to subscribe to a VPN service. There are both free and paid options, and there are a ton of different VPN companies out there, so I want to give you two quick recommendations to start your search. The first one is called Private Internet Access. This is one of the most widely used and trusted VPN providers. It supports Windows, Mac OS, Linux, iOS, and Android, so you can use it on any device. It has servers in several different countries, and it keeps no logs of your activity whatsoever. Pricing starts at $7 a month, with volume discounts if you purchase 6 months or more in advance. If you can handle $7 a month, Private Internet Access is the service I'd recommend, and you can check it out at privateinternetaccess.com. My other suggestion is called ProXPN. ProXPN offers many of the same benefits as Private Internet Access, but it also offers a free plan. The free plan limits your data transfer speeds and restricts you to a single server location, but it's still a great deal if you only need to use it occasionally, say when you're traveling and using public Wi-Fi. It also offers premium plans starting at $10 a month. Unfortunately, ProXPN only supports Windows, Mac OS, and iOS, so it won't work on Android. Once you've subscribed to a VPN service, getting set up is way easier than you'd expect. All you have to do is install an app on each of your devices, configure your settings, and forget about it. It's really as simple as that. So definitely look into getting connected to a VPN. The privacy gives you peace of mind. Being able to access geo-restricted content is cool, and the added security on public Wi-Fi networks could end up saving you a lot of time, money, and headaches in the future. So far, we've taken steps to ensure your data is encrypted while it's in transit. In other words, while it's moving between your device and various web servers. Now we have to tackle the problem of encrypting your data while it's at rest, while it's just sitting on your system. Because in many cases, Even if your computer is protected by a password, someone could gain access to all of your private data simply by removing your hard drive and using another system to break into it. But if your hard drive is encrypted, all they'll see is a bunch of useless, scrambled data. Now, if we're being honest, this isn't mandatory for everyone, but it's never a bad idea, and if you travel with a laptop, I highly recommend encrypting it just in case. It's easy enough to do, and it's something you only have to do once that could really save you if your device is ever stolen. If you have a Mac, you are in luck because Apple makes it ridiculously easy to implement full disk encryption using a built-in feature called File Vault. Just open the Security and Privacy menu in your system preferences, click over to File Vault, and turn it on. Super simple. That's all there is to it. Now, of course, the important thing to remember here is that because your data is encrypted, you'll need your login password or the backup recovery key to access it. If you lose both of those things, your data will be lost forever. So keep that in mind. If you're a Windows user, unfortunately things aren't quite as simple. There's no built-in encryption tool for the consumer versions of Windows, so you'll have to use a third-party program. The one I recommend is called Diskcryptor. It's a free open source program that can encrypt your entire drive for you. Now before we go any further, something to be aware of. Once you encrypt your drive with Diskcryptor, you'll have to enter the encryption password every time you turn on your computer in order for it to boot. This is separate from your normal Windows password, and you'll still have to enter that as well. So that's a little minor inconvenience that you'll have to keep in mind. To get started using Diskcryptor, go to diskcryptor.net, click Download, and then choose the installer. Meanwhile, you'll notice this yellow box at the top advising you to create a bootable live CD before you encrypt your system. That's optional, but it's definitely a good idea in case anything goes wrong in the future. And if you click that link, you'll see instructions on how to do that. Once the installer finishes downloading, go ahead and run it, and then follow the steps to complete the installation. Once it's finished, you'll be asked to restart your computer, so be sure to save anything you're working on. And after the reboot, you can run the Diskcryptor program, select your system drive, which is usually drive C, and click Encrypt. Then you just have to follow the prompts to configure all the various settings, and you're probably best leaving everything as is. As for the password, it should, of course, be something long, complex, and unique, but it should also be something you can remember because if you ever forget your password, you'll lose access to your data. I highly recommend also adding it to LastPass so you don't lose it. The program may take a few hours to encrypt your drive depending on the size of your drive, and in the meantime, you can use your computer for other things. Just be sure not to restart or shut down while Diskcryptor is running unless you pause it first. Once the process is complete, Diskcryptor should list your drive as mounted, and all your data will be encrypted. If you ever change your mind or need your drive to be unencrypted for some reason, just run Diskcryptor again, select your encrypted drive, and click Decrypt. Okay, so I know that was kind of a fast-paced walkthrough. If you run into any problems, the Diskcryptor website has a lot of good resources that should be able to help you out. I also want to remind you one more time that regardless of whether you're on a Mac or a PC, if your drive is encrypted, it is absolutely crucial that you remember your password, because that's the only way to access your data. If you ever lose your password, you lose your data as well. I cannot stress this enough. Please be careful with your password. With that in mind, once you've encrypted your system, your data will be inaccessible to any third parties who don't have your password, even if they have physical access to your device. That should give you great peace of mind, especially if you do a lot of traveling and have sensitive information on your laptop. In the last lecture, we covered encryption for laptop and desktop computers, but these days, it's arguably more important to secure your smartphone, right? Because it contains so much of your personal data, and you probably carry it with you everywhere. So the need for encryption on your mobile devices is kind of a no-brainer, and luckily it's pretty easy to enable, much easier than on a laptop or a desktop. Let's take a look at how to do it on the two biggest mobile operating systems, iOS and Android. On iOS, encryption is enabled automatically when you set a passcode. So if you haven't already, open your settings, go to Touch ID and passcode, turn it on, and enter a strong passcode. That's it. As soon as you've done that, all the data on your device will be encrypted. On Android, the process varies a little bit between devices. Most of the newer flagship Android phones come with encryption enabled by default, and similar to the iPhone, all you have to do is add a security code or fingerprint by opening your settings, going to security, and then screen lock. For older Android devices, you may have to enable encryption manually. If you're going to do this, make sure your phone is connected to power because the process could take a while depending on the amount of data on your device. So first, create a passcode following the same process that we just talked about. Then open your settings, select security, and tap encrypt phone. If you can't find that menu, it may also be hidden in the lock screen section under a menu called Other Security Settings. If your Android device has an SD card, you can encrypt it and prevent it from being used in another device if you go to your settings, select security, followed by encrypt external SD card, and just tap enable. It may be worth noting that your device will likely take a slight performance hit when you encrypt it. It should be barely noticeable on newer high-end phones, but you may feel a significant difference if you're using a really old device, so you'll have to weigh your options there. But all in all, smartphone encryption is pretty easy to implement, and it'll keep your data safe from thieves should your device ever be stolen. We've covered a lot of ground in this course, from the core principles of security to safe browsing habits, smartphone security, passwords, multi-factor authentication, connected apps, and encryption. So what are the next steps? Well, most importantly, I hope this course has inspired you to look at security in a different way. It shouldn't have to be a chore, and it certainly shouldn't be reserved for IT professionals. Security matters to all of us because we all have valuable data that's worth protecting. As you go forward in your day-to-day life, I hope you keep these lessons in mind and take steps to protect yourself whenever you have the opportunity. Nothing can ever be 100% secure, but if you take my advice and surround your data with multiple layers of strong security, you'll be a cybercriminal's worst nightmare. Thank you so much again for joining me in this course. I really hope it's been helpful. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know.